All right, well, next up is our legal team. I'm delighted to introduce them. 5 of our staff attorneys will be reporting to you on their accomplishments since the last convention, and we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for your questions. There's a mic in each aisle. Before they come on, I'd also like to introduce 4 other attorneys present, and please stand up and wave. They're up front here. Maddie Ziegler, who you just met, our intake and staff attorney. Ryan Jane, who works as attorney and legislative counsel. Chris Line, a new law school grad, and Patrick O'Reilly, legal fellow. He also does photography work, you probably noticed. And our new legal fellow, the Robert G. Ingersoll legal fellow, Colin McNamara. All right, our panel is assembled. We have Rebecca Markert, FFRF senior staff attorney and our newly named legal director. Besides her establishment clause work, she manages our attorney staff, plus 2 legal fellows and a variety of interns throughout the year. Rebecca received her BA in political science, international relations, and German at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. She has a lot of experience in the legislative arena, including a 1-year stint as a legislative fellow at the German Parliament and working as legislative correspondent and assistant to the Chief of Staff in U.S. Senator Russ Feingold's D.C. office. She also worked on his 2004 election campaign, or re-election campaign. She has her JD from the Roger Williams University School of Law. Patrick Elliott has a degree in legal studies and political science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He began to question his faith, he says, after he attended a UW debate on religion where Dan Barker spoke. So it was meant to be, if things are meant to be. Patrick received his JD from the University of Wisconsin Law School, where he took an interest in the First Amendment and constitutional law, and he was married 2 years ago by Dan. Andrew Seidel is our new Director of Strategic Response. Yeah. I'm not going in order, sorry. He has a BS and a law degree from Tulane, and he studied human rights and international law at the University of Amsterdam and completed his Master of Laws at Denver University Sturm College of Law, where he was awarded Outstanding LLM Award. Elizabeth Cavell, Associate Counsel at FFRF, received her BA in English from the University of Florida, and she spent a year as a full-time volunteer in AmeriCorps. She received her JD from Tulane University Law School, and after law school, she worked as a deputy public defender in southern Colorado. She joined FFRF as a staff attorney in January of 2013. Sam Grover received his BA in Philosophy and Government from Wesleyan University and his law degree from Boston University School of Law. His first job out of law school was as a law clerk for the Vermont Office of Legislative Counsel, where he drafted legislation on healthcare, human services, and tax issues. He had interned with us and returned to FFRF as associate counsel, or he's now associate counsel. And so here they all are to tell you more about the wonderful work they're doing on your behalf.
A senior group at the Rec Center had planned a trip to the Ark Encounter and Creation Museum in April. The Wisconsin-based Freedom from Religion Foundation got a complaint and sent this letter down to the town asking for the trip to be canceled, telling the town government should not hold events that benefit religious organizations.
It's a problem because the government was organizing the trip.
I think the exact terminology was that it's not really a classroom, It's truly more legislative.
Well, that's absolutely wrong. We sent a 3-page letter detailing the court cases that have found that school board prayers are unconstitutional.
Although Coach Slaughter says the ceremony wasn't part of practice, Cavell argues it creates an uncomfortable environment for students who don't believe the same thing.
There is a lot of pressure on students in general to conform. I think that pressure is heightened in the context of athletics.
Ryan Jane, an attorney with the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Madison, says the group first reached out to the city in 2007. That's when a Menominee resident came to the foundation with a complaint.
Even if you have a city with 99% of the populace being Christian and supporting a Christian nativity, that 1% is relying on the constitutional protections to say that the government must remain neutral on this question.
But not everyone in town agrees with the display.
A Taos resident contacted us last year informing us that there was this cross on public property and asking for our help in getting it taken down.
According to the letter the foundation sent to the town manager, the foundation says the cross is an unconstitutional endorsement of religion.
A Neosho local contacted the Freedom from Religion Foundation and told them about the 60-foot Latin cross that resides on the western knoll of the Big Spring Park. The FFRF wrote a letter to Neosho Mayor Charles Collinsworth asking him to remove the cross or move it to a more private location, such as private property, right away.
Separation of church and state actually benefits all of us, the religious and the non-religious alike.
Last week, the Freedom from Religion Foundation put this letter in front of Chancellor Vitter telling him they think it's wrong for the university to allow it, promote it, and support the tweets.
What Coach Freeze is doing is promoting his personal religious beliefs over all other religious beliefs, and religion generally over non-religion.
So I'm very grateful to Bruce, our multimedia producer, for putting that together for us. Those are like our opening credits this year. I'm also proud to say that most of those violations, almost all of them except for one, were remedied by our letters of complaint. The Taos Cross is still pending resolution. We're probably looking at potential litigation for that one. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm Rebecca Markert, and I am FFRF's first legal director. I'm joined today by my amazing group of attorneys who are going to be presenting with me our legal accomplishments from the last year. And every year I tell this convention that in the past year we've grown and we're doing so much more, and this year's not much different. Obviously, you know now we have 4 more attorneys, so we are at a total of 9. So we continue to grow and we're able to do a lot much more. But one of the differences this year is that we are also growing in our prominence and in our stature. Over the last year, the attorneys here at FFRF have been called upon by other lawyers across the country who are litigating cases on religious liberty and asking us for our advice and our expert opinion on cases that they're litigating. And that is a great reflection on our team and how well respected they are. And it's also significant because this is a young group of attorneys. We have all been practicing for less than 10 years. I've been practicing the longest, and it'll be 9 this year. So it is a great reflection on our team that we have litigators with much, much more experience calling our attorneys and asking them for their expert opinion. So I'm really proud that we have that. And drawing on that, we also have been asked to testify before state legislatures on important matters like the effect of Trinity Lutheran on the Blaine Amendment, which prohibits government funding to religion. So that was exciting. Andrew will talk about that a little bit later. And this year we were also asked to write a law review article on religion in the public schools. And this is also significant. If you're not a lawyer, law review articles are really important. Just to let you know, when you don't know an area of law, you have to look for these secondary sources, and law review articles are these secondary sources that help get your feet wet and understand this particular area of law. And when you're looking at Establishment Clause cases or anything really on religious liberty, and you go through these journals, you read a lot of articles from Christian law schools. One of our goals is to make sure that we get the other side in these articles so that when new lawyers and clerks, law clerks and judges are looking up information to try to figure out what they're supposed to do in a particular case, they're getting this balanced view. So we were able to publish this article. It was published just a month ago in the Education Law and Policy Review Journal. So that was very exciting. And we continue to build coalitions with other secular organizations around the country, like Americans United and the American Humanist Association, CFI, American Atheists. All of those organizations are working together to further our legal landscape. But like I said, this team has become a talented powerhouse, and I'm really proud to work with every one of them. So Lisa introduced them to you, but here's a picture of them again. But one of the people that she did not introduce is our legal assistant. So I want her to stand up, Whitney Steffen, and get her due. Many of you probably correspond with her pretty regularly. When you write to us, she is the one who's managing our correspondence, so she's sending out our letters, she's processing all of the response. I mean, she really is the one who's getting the work done for us. She really assists us to make our job easier. So she definitely needed some recognition here today. And so you know all the other attorneys. You also know that Andrew has transitioned into this new role, Director of Strategic Response, and that is really to address a growing need that we've seen for the last 8 years that I've been here at FFRF. We've wanted to get more into fighting legislation on the state and federal levels. We're seeing more and more legislation that are affecting state church issues, and we really wanted to get more involved with that. So Andrew now will be able to handle that full time with the assistance of Ryan Jane, one of our former legal fellows, now staff attorney. And then they're also going to be able to continue this rapid response team, which helps address some of the horrible statements that elected officials say about religion in the public square, and really jump on a lot of these issues that are pretty timely. So he's going to talk at length about that, so I will not right now. So then, Lisa mentioned our 2 new legal fellows. 2 years ago, I started this program here at FFRF for legal fellowships. This is when new attorneys, new recent law grads come to FFRF and work for a period of 1 to 2 years. They get trained in Establishment Clause jurisprudence, and then our hope is that they go out into the world, and when they're in private practice or if they're working for the government or for a judge or in academia, they have this history and knowledge of the Establishment Clause, and they're able to shape the law in their future areas of practice. So we have on the right Chris Line, who is the Patrick O'Reilly Legal Fellow for the next year, and then Colin McNamara, who just started 2 weeks ago, and he is the Robert G. Ingersoll Legal Fellow. Chris comes to us from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he has been with us for his entire law school career. He started as a 1L and graduated this May. Colin comes to us from the University of Richmond in Virginia, and highly recommended from the ACLU of Virginia, where he spent a lot of his law student career. So we're excited to have them. We also continue our internship program. We were able to have 7 interns this past year, 5 of which were this summer. And 2 of those law students came from top 10 law schools, Columbia University, which depending on the year is the top law school in the country, and the University of Michigan, which is consistently in the top 10. So we were really excited that now we have students at these big Ivy League schools that are also interested in coming and working in free thought. We think that's a pretty good sign. So with this incredible team, growing team, what have we accomplished this past year? And the short answer is a lot. Like Dan told you last night, we won 5 lawsuits last year. 3 were closed immediately, and 2 are still pending appeal in the appellate circuits. We filed 4 lawsuits, so currently we're managing 13 ongoing lawsuits, and Patrick's going to talk about these at length. We also do a tremendous amount of non-litigation advocacy at FFRF. We're sending letters of complaints to government agencies, and we are really called on by you and other members of the public who have inquiries about state-church separation. And each year we get about almost 5,000 complaints that we have to filter through and deem actionable or find some other sort of strategy to deal with them. So far, in 2017, we've processed 2,817 of these questions and complaints. And some of these are duplicates, multiple people writing in about the same thing. So when we take out those duplicates, we're still at 2,400, which is pretty significant. So that means we're on track to meet that 4,500 or 5,000 complaints this year. The bulk of our complaints come at the end of the year when school's back in session and then during the holiday season. We are expecting that again this year. And not all of those questions and inquiries become letters of complaint. Some we receive are just FYIs, or some members are just seeking guidance because they want to handle the matter themselves, and some require further information that we may never get or that we are unable to ascertain for some sort of reason, and some are simply not actionable at all. But when they are actionable, we send a letter. And since our convention in Pittsburgh last year, we've sent 1,060 letters of complaint. And so far in 2017, we've written 783. Since Pittsburgh last year, we've received 204 clear-cut victories that were immediately addressed. A lot of times we don't hear about these victories until much, much later. And we've received this year 122 victories. And we expect more to come. Over the last year, our team has also been able to add FFRF's voice to other cases around the country involving the Establishment Clause or religious liberty issues. We filed 4 amicus briefs this past year, and I'm going to take a moment to discuss some of those with you. The first one we filed was here in Wisconsin in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals over a church property taxation issue, and we are awaiting a decision on that case. We also filed an amicus brief in support of the American Humanist Association in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. American Humanist Association was challenging a school board practice of prayer before their meetings, and they lost at the Fifth Circuit and are now petitioning the Supreme Court for review. But we were able to submit this amicus before the Fifth Circuit together with a coalition of the Center for Inquiry, American Atheists, the Secular Coalition for America, the Richard Dawkins Foundation. So that was also pretty exciting. But the biggest submission that we've had, I forgot. We were also asked by prominent lawyer and friend of FFRF, Marcy Hamilton, to file a amicus brief before the U.S. Supreme Court in a case that she was litigating over church property disputes. And it was quite the honor to have her call us up because she is one of the leading experts in this area of the law, and she wanted us to help her out in that case, so we were excited to do that. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court in that case decided not to hear it, but it was still an honor to be asked to add our voice. But our biggest submission just came 3 days ago when we submitted an amicus brief in the Muslim travel ban cases. These are the cases from the Fourth and Ninth Circuits that involve Trump's restrictions on travel from 6 Muslim majority countries. And like Dan and Annie Laurie told you last night, we argued in our brief that this executive order violates the Establishment Clause. The administration was pretty explicit in its first order that the travel ban was to restrict Muslim refugees and favor Christian refugees. Trump admitted as much in television interviews, particularly in one to the Christian Broadcast Network, where he stated that, quote, if you were a Muslim, you could come in, but if you were a Christian, it was almost impossible, and that was very, very unfair, so we are going to help them being Christians. This obviously gives preferential treatment to one particular religion, and we also argued that the order had a religious purpose. It was preferring Christianity over all other religions and disfavoring Islam in violation of the Establishment Clause. The order was amended, as you may recall, in March, but we don't think that this can erase the previous history of discrimination and his religious purpose. We also, in the argument, in the brief, made the novel argument that the order violates Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits a religious test for office. But that's not the only part of the clause. There is the religious test for office or public trust. And we argued that that necessarily extends to citizenship, immigrants, visa holders, or any other visitor to the United States. And the court, back in 1946, actually agreed that that article extended to citizenship when it stated, "It's hard to believe that one need forsake his religious scruples to become a citizen, but not to sit on the high councils of the state." And we also argued that the founders also meant it to mean more, that the public trust was more. And in our amicus brief, we cited some quotes from the Federalist Papers just talking about that. As Annie Laurie mentioned last night, we're concerned that if this is upheld, this could create a terrible precedent that if they can target non-Christians, that they could also target non-believers. And certainly we can all agree that one's religion or irreligion cannot be the basis of political privilege or discrimination in this country. There are hundreds of briefs being submitted in this case. They're due on Monday, but our printer said that we had to get it in earlier this week in order to make the deadline. And the court is set to hear these arguments in October. And we're going to be submitting more briefs. It's one of the things that we want to do this year is expand our amicus brief practice. And so this October, we are going to be submitting a brief to the U.S. Supreme Court in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, which involves the baker from Colorado who refused to bake a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. Being able to draft and submit these briefs is really important to FFRF. It's a big deal because it gives FFRF a chance to lend its voice in Establishment Clause cases that it can't take for some reason or another, but then also lend our voice and opinion to cases that touch on other religious liberty issues that our members are interested in, but are not our bread and butter Establishment Clause cases. So I'm going to bring up the rest of our team to discuss the rest of our accomplishments from this year. Patrick's going to talk about some of our litigation victories and new filings. And then Liz is going to come up and talk about our non-litigation advocacy and some of our victories there. And then Sam is going to come up and talk about our legislative efforts from this last year. And we'll end with Andrew Seidel, who will talk about our other legal advocacy.
As Rebecca said, I'll talk about some of our litigation efforts. As you heard, it was a bit of a historic year in that we filed 4 lawsuits in just the first few months of the year. And these lawsuits involve a few different issues, but in particular this year, as in typical years, sometimes those involve religious endorsements where the government's preferencing religion or putting its stamp of approval on religion. We also have a case this year regarding religious instruction in public schools, and also a case regarding coercive religious practices by the government. And so I'll address some of these. We saw a little bit of a preview from Dan and Annie Laurie last night, but I'll talk a little bit more about these or give a little more info on some of the cases. When we talk about the religious endorsements, we're not just upholding the First Amendment, we're also preventing the government, a local municipality, from holding itself out as being a Christian community. And so we think both of those aspects are important when we're addressing some of those cases. One of those cases that was actually filed last year is against the city of Santa Clara, California, over this cross in a public park. And what you may not know is how much work goes into pursuing something like this. Rebecca's been trying to move or remove this cross since 2012. The city originally seemed that they were receptive to that and never really, over the years, even at her prodding, never took action to remove it. And so we had to file a lawsuit last year with one of our local members. And as you may have observed, I'm proud to announce it was removed this year, I believe in January. And so it did require a lawsuit in order for that to finally be removed. Another cross lawsuit that had also been filed recently relates to the Pensacola. The city of Pensacola has a 25-foot cross that we historically worked with the American Humanist Association jointly on this case with a number of local atheists and members to remove the cross. And just this summer, as reported by Todd Starnes of Fox News, cross in Pensacola must come down, violates Constitution, federal judge rules. And here's part of what the federal judge said. The Bayview Cross can no longer stand as a permanent fixture on city-owned property. The law is the law. And that's just a great summary of him reluctantly ruling that the cross had come down. That case is on appeal. The case law is very much in our favor, and so we'll continue to pursue that case. And besides challenges to these religious endorsements, we also filed a case this year against the school district in West Virginia, Mercer County Schools. In January, we brought a case against the school system. Their egregious Bible in the Schools classes for elementary school students. So joining FFRF as plaintiffs in this case are two brave families. These Bible classes are taught by teachers who possess a degree in Bible. I don't know what that is. The classes begin in first grade, and they're held weekly, and they include creationism and other religious instruction. And so we put up, these are some actual slides from the class, and so it might have been some time since you had this type of education at school, so I'll just give a refresher. On the right, you have Moses with the Ten Commandments, and on the left, maybe you were taught that, Eve was the one who picked fruit, but apparently Adam is picking fruit. Eve is, I guess, playing with a hummingbird, and in this version of the world, tigers are no longer carnivores, and of course, there's a dinosaur in the background. And so, this is just an example, but within the scripts, which we were able to get copies of, it's very intentional that there's creationism instruction. We have a little bit of a clip describing what happened after the suit was filed.
Tuesday night, Mercer County Schools voted to suspend its elementary-level Bible in the School classes. Jeremy Dice is an attorney for First Liberty Institute, the Texas law firm representing Mercer County Schools. Earlier today, he described the suspension as putting the class on pause.
As they do with a lot of their curriculum, they said, let's take some time here to get some community involvement. Since this is an elected, let's get some community involvement to figure out what this curriculum is going to look like in the future.
Third grader Blake Dunnigan is enrolled in the Bible class. He says he enjoys it and is bummed by its suspension next year.
I would not feel very good because I like the class, because I learn about Jesus and all that.
The Mercer County mother who filed the suit to have the Bible classes stopped permanently is represented by the Freedom from Religion Foundation. FFRF is pleased at this first step in addressing what they call long-standing violations of constitutional right.
And so this case is still pending in the Southern District of West Virginia, but I'm pleased to announce for the first year in, I think, almost 75 years, students started this school year and did not have these Bible classes in their school system. And the final case that I will address relates to what I would call the coercive religious practices. This is a case that FFRF filed against Judge Wayne Mack, who, I guess we have a video that will give you an introduction.
We're the lowest court in the land, but we're the highest volume.
His courtroom in Willis was quiet this afternoon, but Justice of the Peace Wayne Mack has presided over thousands of cases. He starts each day with an opening ceremony that includes a chaplain offering an invocation. What if not everybody is comfortable with it? Is that a reason enough to stop doing it?
Well, we give everyone an opportunity in the abundance of caution. We announce what we're going to do.
Multiple signs are posted outside court informing that an opening ceremony includes a brief invocation and that they are not required to be present.
I cannot control people being offended, and I think a lot of problems in our society today is we're worried about the political correctness.
He is following in the footsteps and example of our United States Supreme Court, the Texas Supreme Court, and both our federal and state legislatures, who also have a brief invocation at the beginning of their sessions.
An opinion this week from the state attorney general supports the judge, but the foundation finds it politically motivated, telling us too that the Constitution protects minority religions and non-religious individuals from having to endure this.
And so on March 21st, we filed suit, so this took place before our case was actually filed, seeking an injunction against the judge. That case is currently pending, and as you saw, the Attorney General of Texas has sought to intervene in that case. And so while these are some of our litigation efforts, we've been especially active in regarding trying to resolve disputes without having to resort to court or resort to litigation. And so Associate Counsel Elizabeth Cavell will highlight some of those cases.
So as you heard from Rebecca, in addition to our litigation efforts, our legal department has always worked to end state church violations through non-litigation advocacy, which has been the bread and butter of the FFRF legal department for decades. And so that means we receive reports about state church violations from all over the country. And then when founded, we send letters to those government agencies, educating them on the law and warning them when their conduct is unconstitutional. So as you heard from Rebecca, we sent 1,060 letters since our last convention in Pittsburgh. So what I'm going to highlight today is just a really tiny sample of the types of things we address with our non-litigation legal advocacy from the past year. So this first example was a tiny town called Ryanzi, Mississippi, where the city was flying a Christian flag at their Veterans Memorial. And so for those of you who don't know the Christian flag, it is a white flag with a red Latin cross in a blue canton. So it's on the left-hand picture, the flag flying below the town's flag. On the photo on the left, you see it flying, and on the right, you don't see it flying because a letter from FFRF attorney Sam Grover convinced the town to remove it super grudgingly, and
from
this
the VFW
is a video.
in Corinth, 12 miles to the Veterans Memorial Park in Ryanzi, proudly waving their Christian flags.
There just comes a point in time when you've got to be politically incorrect and take a stand.
The same flag this town of just over 300 was forced to take down when the Freedom from Religion Foundation sent this letter threatening a potential $500,000 lawsuit. Ryanzi Mayor Walter Williams says it was a tough decision to make to pull the flag down, but he believes he had no choice.
I would have never dreamed something like this would ever happen in a town this fall. But, it happened.
But the people of this tight-knit, predominantly Christian town say they won't go down without a fight.
We're not going to let a company or a foundation or anybody else up in Wisconsin tell us that we can't fly a flag.
As a proud American, but number one as a proud Christian, I came today to stand up for the Lord and stand up for our freedom.
My whole point behind this, you're going to take one down, we're going to put 100 back up.
The removal of the Christian flag here at the Veterans Memorial Park has been the talk of this tiny town.
A good example from Mississippi of our a successful non-litigation letter. The town did the right thing after much drama and moaning. These next two photos were two different complaints, but they were both crosses displayed on public property. So you've heard about some complaints where government agencies were recalcitrant and forcing us to sue to remove crosses from public property. These are some examples where that wasn't necessary due to our non-litigation efforts. On the left here is the Veterans Memorial Park in Belle Plaine, Minnesota. On the right and you saw this a little bit teased in the intro video, is Neosho, Missouri. Both of these cities received letters from our legal director, Rebecca Markert, this year. And Belle Plaine on the left first agreed to remove the cross from that Veterans Memorial. After community outcry, of course, they backtracked and said they'd create a public forum for private speech. Then a satanic monument was proposed by another group, and leading to protests, of course. And finally, the city said, never mind, and they removed the cross from that display, a secular veterans memorial offending nobody. And then on the right, you see this sort of odd cross is built into the side of a hill on public property in Neosho. Actually, the city would prominently light this up as part of their Christmas display, and they also sort of had a tradition of using it as a living cross for a Easter service where elementary school children would fill in the cross, stand inside of it in the shape of a cross with lights. So charming history there. And after lots of back and forth with Rebecca, the city now, Neosho, is in the process of divesting themselves from that piece of property. So the last few examples that I want to share with you are complaints that our attorneys addressed in public schools. And we prioritize religious promotion in public schools, and we send the majority of our complaint letters, usually anywhere from a third to half of our complaint letters every year go to public school districts to address religious promotion on impressionable school-age children who are compelled by law to attend public schools. So this first complaint is one that was sent to Fayette County Public Schools in Georgia, where a high school teacher's classroom was decorated with these signs styled as like license plates for who knows why. And one more that's not on this slide, which I have to tell you read, "Real men pray every day." Our attorney, Maddie Ziegler, sent a letter to this school district pointing out that obviously religious displays in public schools are an endorsement of religion, and also pointing out the important point that is often lost on public school teachers, which is they do not have a free speech right to promote their personal religion on their public school classroom walls. So these signs were promptly removed. The teacher was counseled by the district on his obligations as a public school teacher. And this was in Warwick County schools in Indiana. So schools were distributing these really disturbing flyers to 3rd and 4th grade students targeting girls. And I don't know if you can read what they say, but these were being passed out by a ministry that taught lessons of purity to young girls. And they included homophobic and anti-transgender views, and the ministry was very explicit about the views they held relating gay and transgender students, or children. And what you can't see is that the organization is called POP. POP stands for Pearls of Purity, and the tagline there is cultivating girls for him. So, yeah. So even though courts actually, frustratingly, have decided that schools actually can distribute third-party literature pursuant to a neutral policy of that type of access. But Ryan Jane, our attorney, former fellow and now attorney, sent a letter encouraging the district anyway to at least amend their flyer policy to prohibit flyers from organizations that promote discrimination. And the superintendent in this district actually responded, quote, "You have my word that flyers of this nature will not be distributed home in the future." So everyone was embarrassed by this.
if you would, I'd just like to invite you to close your eyes. Picture Jesus standing right in front of you.
Close your eyes and picture Jesus standing right in front of you. This is a public middle school in Alabama. This was a public school assembly recently held on August 11th. Obviously, you can see in the video teachers standing along the walls there watching students as they rush down from the bleachers, following their peers, to bow down before that wooden cross in the front, and there's an evangelist, singer on the stage singing a sort of hymn. This was so egregious and such a clear example of the exploitation of that peer pressure and that desire to conform that's present in every child in public school. And this is just the perfect example of why we prioritize complaints that we hear about in public schools. So our legal fellow, Chris Line, wrote to this school district just last month. He is currently corresponding with their attorney and making sure they understand the seriousness of this violation and that nothing like this is allowed again in that district. And this final slide is another public school example of a letter we sent about religious materials. So this was in Panama Buena Vista Union School District, that's in California. These materials here come from a phonics textbook published by Abeka, and Abeka is a Christian publisher, and they design books for homeschoolers and for Christian schools. They specifically market their materials to those types of educators, and they describe their materials as, quote, approaching every subject from a Christian perspective with, quote, scripture and biblical principles used to emphasize or illustrate concepts. And of course, you see that here. On the left, you see a sight word exercise, and the sight word is Bible, which, out of all those words, says, I like to read the Bible. It is the best book. God speaks to me in the Bible. He tells me how to be good. On the right, you see it says, I can pray, with a similar exercise. And then on the right-hand photo is sort of a comprehension, fill in the missing word exercise that says, God made the blank, and you're supposed to draw a line to sun, although arguably confusing since God presumably made all of the things on that list. This was actually sent home with a kindergartner. It was reported to us from a mom of a kindergartner who came home with these phonics assignments from her public school teacher. I actually wrote to this district and asked them to root out these religious materials. The administration wrote back and assured us that Abeka books and Abeka materials are not approved for curricular use in their district, and they addressed this with every single site principal to root this out of public school classrooms. So probably a rogue teacher, but you see this kind of thing really at the youngest age levels in public schools where this is absolutely inappropriate. So, as you heard from Rebecca, another exciting development in our legal department this past year is the ramping up of our lobbying efforts and our rapid response work with the creation of our strategic response team. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sam and then Andrew, who are going to tell you what we've done on those fronts.
Thanks, Liz. So I'm going to transition us now in discussing FFRF's efforts on legislation. As a 501c3 nonprofit, we're obviously limited in the amount of money and time we can dedicate to nonpartisan lobbying efforts. But even so, we've done a lot in the past year to ensure that secular voices, ours and yours, are being heard around the country. So FFRF has issued over 100 action alerts in the past year, at least 67 of which called for action against state or federal legislation. The other action alerts, the non-legislation action alerts, addressed a number of other issues. Andrew will touch on a couple, including Trump's cabinet and judicial nominations, and then things like prayer events, religious statements by mayors and governors, and calls for a new constitutional convention, just to name a few. For legislation, over 90% of the bills we tracked were negative. designed to advance the agenda of evangelicals on the religious right. There's been an increased political will in the last year to pander to that shrinking religious majority. This year, we saw a significant uptick in bills masquerading as protecting students' religious liberties, even though most of the specific things the bills addressed were already protected by law, like referencing religion in homework and praying in school in a non-disruptive manner. These things have always been legal, and no one's trying to change that. Yet that's a straw man that's propped up in order to advance these bills. And the reason why we issue numerous action alerts against legislation like this in states like Florida, Indiana, Kentucky, and North Dakota is that the bill's real purpose is to create new requirements that schools include opportunities for students to proselytize other students during events like football games or other athletic events and graduation ceremonies. We've also seen a surge in states contemplating religious license plate bills, pro-Bible legislation, including public school Bible classes, general calls for Bible literacy, and proposing the Bible as the official state book. And then Religious Freedom Restoration Act style bills that allow religiously run organizations to discriminate against LGBTQ citizens, like two bills adopted in Alabama and South Dakota this year that allow Christian adoption agencies to deny service to gay families, transgender kids, and anyone else that they deem offensive to their delicate religious sensibilities. In 2016, just to go back and compare, you can see in red that only 16% of the bad bills that we tracked became law. And that was represented by only 7 bills total, 6 bad state bills, and 1 resolution that had no practical effect. The rest of the bad bills died in committee or were rejected after FFRF took action. At the same time, we were able to help 3 pro-free thought bills become law. So there was an anti-faith healing bill in Tennessee, an anti-discrimination in higher education bill in California, and a federal amendment to the International Religious Freedom Act, which specifically recognized the right to be non-religious. This year, however, there was far more political will to pass pro-religion legislation. We jumped from tracking 43 to 59 bad bills in 2017, and fully 25% of those bills, 15 in total, did become law. And we've been unable to advance any pro-free thought bills past the committee stage. But we're adjusting to this new political climate by revamping our lobbying efforts, as Rebecca mentioned earlier. So Ryan Jane is taking over legislation tracking and will be working under Andrew, which will allow our rapid response team to devote additional time and attention to combating bad bills and proposing ones that protect the rights of the non-religious. In addition to action alerts, our attorneys have also made multiple trips to our nation's capital to interact directly with House and Senate members. So senior counsel Patrick Elliott made 2 trips to Washington, D.C. in order to lobby Congress, once with me, who were pictured on the left, and once with Ryan, pictured on the right, along with Wisconsin Congressman Mark Pocan. In total, we spoke with 46 congressional offices and a number of influential committees on a variety of issues, including protecting the Johnson Amendment, which prohibits churches and nonprofits from endorsing political candidates, and opposing a federal school voucher scheme and Trump's proposed tax credit, either of which would funnel taxpayer money into private religious schools. Patrick and I also left literature on these topics with staffers at all 100 Senate offices and an additional 139 House offices. Then when Ryan and Patrick returned to DC later this year, they visited an additional number of House offices to drop off more information. And as a result, I can guarantee you that we've left literature with both of your senators and more than likely also your congressman or congresswoman. Yeah, sure. And then finally, we spoke out against specific pieces of legislation through committee testimony as well. At the federal level, we submitted testimony to the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform to urge for the preservation of the Johnson Amendment. And on the state level, the Rapid Response Team sent Andrew to testify before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights Colorado Advisory Committee, where he defended the Colorado Constitution's no funding provision, which prohibits state money from going to churches. And I testified on 2 different bills at the Wisconsin State Capitol. One was a bill that essentially would have turned religious organizations into their own state-recognized auto insurers, all in an effort to placate a religious group that doesn't like the state's law mandating that drivers on the road carry insurance. Fortunately, that bill died in committee after my testimony. And here we have highlights to give you a flavor of the testimony I did on a second Wisconsin bill, AB 206, which proposed to prohibit doctors and medical students at UW's School of Medicine and Public Health from participating in any abortion procedure, even ones performed at private women's clinics. So in my testimony, I first point out that there are many reasons to not pass this bill. It would have undermined the education of Wisconsin's medical students. It would have jeopardized the medical school's accreditation for its OB-GYN program. And it would have exacerbated the shortage of qualified obstetrics and gynecology providers in the state, which are already, there's a need. And I pick it up from there. But the only argument in favor of the bill appears to be based on a vague and contrived belief that abortion is evil. This bill is little more than a religiously motivated attack on one of our state's most desperately needed secular institutions. Since the time of Copernicus, when the Catholic Church suppressed his heliocentric model of our solar system, religious institutions have had a long and fraught history of undermining science education that conflicts with church doctrine. But the religious patriarchy's attacks on the teaching of abortion, a safe and widely needed medical procedure, are particularly troubling as these attacks not only impact our quest for knowledge, but also real women's bodily autonomy. This bill is religion at its worst. It advances the church's agenda with no perceivable public benefit through a 2-pronged assault on science education and women. As elected representatives, FFRF asks that you divorce yourselves from this most shameful church history. For government officials to advocate a biblical viewpoint on matters of family planning and women's rights is a disregard for the enshrined principle of state governance free of religion, as well as a woman's right to govern her own body. It is not legislators' prerogative to advance their personal religious beliefs through bills that impact all citizens, many of whom practice a minority religion or no religion at all. So that was just a, yeah. So after I gave that testimony, I also went on a local Madison radio station, WORT, to discuss the drawbacks of the bill, along with my fiance, who is a medical student here interested in obstetrics and gynecology. So that was a fun tag team interview. And I'm happy to report that post-testimony and public education on this, the bill has essentially died in committee. It's not going anywhere. So that's what we've done in the past year on legislation. We're subsequently ramping up our efforts, as I mentioned earlier. So we're going to have an even larger impact moving forward. And now I'm going to turn things over to Andrew to discuss the other aspects of strategic response.
You're so tall, Sam. Okay. So the Rapid Response Team has been something of a dream of the legal team for a while now, and we really needed it this year more than ever. The new administration kept us very busy. We began by asking Trump to keep religion out of the inauguration. And this is actually something that we did for President Obama twice as well. We actually sued Obama over it. We explained that the presidential oath laid out in Article 2 of the Constitution does not include the words "so help me God," and nor is there any mention of or need for a Bible in that inauguration ceremony. And we followed that up with something new that we've been trying to do to help educate, a Facebook Live event during the inauguration itself, the inauguration of regression, we called it. It's eventually been viewed by something like 20,000 times. And we turned this at the end into a question and answer session, addressing many of your concerns about the new administration, my favorite being, should we move to Canada? I explained that no, this is our country too. This is our Constitution, our First Amendment, and our Bill of Rights. And we are not going to abandon them to the theocrats. I'm here, we are here, FFRF is here. We are going to fight like hell for your rights. And we have been fighting. Part of that included vetting Trump's nominees for important cabinet posts. For the first time in FFRF's history, we actually had the resources to vet all these nominees. And we haven't really seen a cabinet like this, that's this theocratic in a very long time, if ever. This was a little graphic that we came up with after I was ranting on Twitter one night about the cabinet. But we didn't just vet these nominees. We actually turned this extensive research into questions that we gave to all the senators who were sitting on the committees that actually have the hearings on the particular nominees, so that they could use that information and our sample questions to help vet those people.
Test for holding on.
Oops. And sometimes that information actually worked its way into the Senate hearing. And this is actually an exchange that you'll see between Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. He received our packet of information on Attorney General nominee Jeff Sessions, who has some disturbing views about secularism and secular Americans. And we laid those out in our packet of information. And here we'll see Sessions, just watch his face as he realizes that it's actually not okay to denigrate secular Americans.
Test for holding office.
And a secular person has just as good a claim to understanding the truth as a person who is religious, correct?
Well, I'm not sure.
Now, it's hard to know whether Whitehouse's drubbing of Sessions, you can watch it, it's pretty fun, on this subject was a direct result of our information. But we also submitted information and questions on Ben Carson for Housing and Urban Development, Betsy DeVos for Education, Scott Pruitt at EPA, Rick Perry at Energy, Dan Coates for Director of National Intelligence, Sonny Perdue at Agriculture, Sam Brownback, most recently, who's going to be possibly the Ambassador for Religious Freedom, judges, including Amy Barrett for the 7th Circuit, Mike Pompeo for CIA Director, and then right now we're working on 2 nominees from the First Liberty Institute, who you heard in the Mercer County, the Bible class video that Patrick showed. This group is the anti-FFRF, and not as competent either. 2 of them are up for lifetime appointments to the federal judiciary. So stay tuned for that. We're going to need your help on that one. And of course, the rapid response team vetted every one of Trump's possible nominees to the Supreme Court. We were ready should it have been one of the bad ones, and it was. Gorsuch authored one of the terrible opinions in the Hobby Lobby case before it actually got to the Supreme Court. He has been working to redefine religious liberty, seeking to turn it into a license to discriminate. Now, in the past, we've looked at Supreme Court nominees as they've been nominated, but for the first time, we were able to look at the potential list and be ready as soon as a name was released. And we also took on Trump's nominee for ambassador of the Vatican, who's going to be Callista Gingrich, probably. But we didn't actually stop there. We also explained why there should be no ambassador to the Vatican, period. This is a church. Thank you. And so we actually asked the administration to sever all political ties with this church. Now, perhaps most importantly, we analyzed and attacked Trump's executive order on religious freedom, both when it was leaked in January and when it was signed on May 4th. The rapid response team also prepared FFRF's lawsuit against Trump over the order, which allowed us to file the lawsuit the very same day that he signed the order. We also drafted the press release and an appeal to members, and we authored a statement explaining why FFRF chose to sue when other groups declined. Rich Bolton, are you here yet? Rich Bolton now at Boardman Clark is actually handling the lawsuit now that we've kind of moved on from it. So it's not just the federal government that the rapid response team, the strategic response team now, is taking on. We're also handling some of the more immediate pressing legal issues that sort of pop up and that used to derail the whole legal team. So when there's just an emergency where we have to get a letter out today or tomorrow, that will often come to us. And one of those happened actually at last year's convention. Just after the convention, one of the attendees, Jeff Prebeg, emailed me and explained that his request for a personalized atheist license plate in Pennsylvania had been denied, and his time frame to appeal it was coming up right away. So he had been denied. You can see he requested atheist, no God, and no God using ones and zeros for O's and I's. And he was denied. But, oh, no, not on our watch. So we fired off a quick letter, and he got his license plate not too long ago. And we sent a number of letters like this on a range of issues, stopping those immediate violations. You actually saw one earlier in the intro. The audio didn't come in for a little bit, where I stopped, and I kid you not, Christiansburg, Virginia, from organizing a trip to Ken Ham's Ark Park. We also work very closely with Amit, Molly, and FFRF's talented communications team, Lauren. We help draft a lot of the legal stuff, so the press releases, statements, and talking points on all manner of legal issues, including why climate change is a state church issue, and that ever popular question about FFRF, why don't we ever go after Islam? And this actually it started out as a blog, and then it became an FAQ, and we did an episode of our new Facebook Live show, Ask an Atheist, on this. And then Rebecca and I, when we were speaking at the Religion News Writers Association last week, actually used the FAQ, because a number of reporters said, it seems like you only go after Christians. Why is that? And we were able to, here you go. And we also help with issuing statements on the important legal decisions, such as the Fourth and Sixth Circuit's recent decisions on prayer, legislative prayer, the Supreme Court's ERISA cases, which we actually filed 4 amicus briefs for last year, and then the Supreme Court's decision in Trinity Lutheran, which was awful. We also wrote something like 30 op-eds and letters to the editor about, again, a range of issues: creationism in South Dakota, bills allowing discrimination in adoption in Texas, to religious phrases that are up in Virginia courthouses. But we're also kind of the catch-all right now, the wall-to-wall coverage that's required when you're defending the wall of separation. And as that catch-all, we handled all kinds of random pressing issues, including Marco Rubio tweeting Bible verses, which the Washington Post picked up, rebutting some of Ken Ham's lies about FFRF and evolution and about his park after our commercial that you got to see last night, and explaining to the San Antonio mayor that denigrating atheists is not morally defensible or politically acceptable. The Washington Post picked this up, and she was actually not reelected. Not that we asked for that. So we also found out about the White House hosting a Bible study for cabinet members. We wrote some letters, and Fox News felt the need to distort that situation. You saw a little bit of this clip last night, and if you did get to see it last night, pay attention to Pete, the middle guy, the host's reaction a little bit halfway through this, and then I particularly like the way they try to portray me at the very end. Oh, hang on. Of course it's not going to go. Okay, it won't go. I apologize. At the end of it, this is Dr. Jay Strack. I'm sure he's a doctor of not something important. He says, "I'm so dismayed and appalled," or "I'm so upset that Andrew is so dismayed and appalled and distraught." And that's the freeze frame right after he says that. I just thought, we atheists are always so joyless and miserable. So we could spend pretty much the rest of the convention talking about all the victories we've had and telling you all the war stories from our time defending the wall of separation, but we are pretty much out of time. We wanted to leave time for questions, but when you give lawyers a chance to talk, but we are going to be around, and we do want to answer your questions. If you have state church complaints, you think there might be a violation going on in your area, come find us, talk to us about it. We are your watchers on the wall of separation. and we are here to fight for you, so definitely come see us, and we will do our best to answer. Don't forget, other attorneys here, and then the 5 of us, come find us, and thank you.